Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer,
I'm Krista Carmen,
and this is
Murder Coaster.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. All month long, we have been discussing the werewolf, from its mythological origins to the notorious werewolf trials of the Middle Ages, to infamous serial killers who were branded as werewolves. And we thought it would be interesting to reach out to our friends in the horror writing community to get their take on what the werewolf means to those who pen nightmares for a living. From mainstream best-selling authors to underground indie writers of extreme horror and splatterpunk, and everywhere in between, we have curated an amazing selection of voices in the horror writing world. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we present to you horror writers on werewolves.
Let's begin. Gwendolyn Keist, three-time Bram Stoker Award-winning author of The Rust Maidens, Reluctant Immortals, and Her Smile Will Untether the Universe, Pretty Mary's All in a Row, The Invention of Ghosts, and Bone Satin Feathers. What do you think of when you hear the word werewolf on a poetic level?
So for me, werewolves are just all about transformation. They're all about body horror and how these bodies can change on us in ways that we just can't even always expect. And also on a poetic level, I love the connection between the wolf and the moon. And it's so beautiful and even a little bit witchy. And yeah, so like for me, the werewolves are just all about that body horror and the connection to the moon and all of these things that feel so primal to us.
Jeff Strand, Bram Stoker Award-winning author of over 50 books, including Blister, Autumn Bleeds into Winter, Dweller, and most recently, Veiled. Can you tell us, please, Jeff, what comes to mind when you hear the word werewolf?
I love werewolves. Weirdly, what comes to mind is what I subverted, because in my book, Wolf Hunt, the werewolves have complete control over their abilities. And that's actually not my favorite part of the mythos. What I like about werewolves is the lack of control. So I like that the werewolf can be both the hero and the villain of the same story. You know, when you become a werewolf through no fault of your own, you're an innocent person who got bit, but then you wake up in the morning with blood all over your bed and you have no idea what you did. So yeah, my favorite part of it is that it's, the bad guy and the hero can be the same person, complete loss of control, maybe complete loss of memory, just the fact that you're out there doing horrible things as a monster and possibly having absolutely no memory of what you've done. So that's really the loss of control is my favorite part of the werewolf mythos.
All right, we have Lauren Elise Daniels, awarded poet, senior editor, best-selling author of Serpent's Wake, A Tale for the Bitten. What do you think of when you hear the word werewolf?
This is such a great question. I would first like to say that I wrote a little horror comedy piece for the Horror Writers Association's Halloween Haunts blog. And my little piece will be released on the 30th of October, which, that's Devil's Night or Cabbage Night if you're from Rhode Island. For me, it was the costume that I chose through the 70s and 80s repeatedly, probably to the worry of my parents, because it's so much fun. Werewolves are fun. You get to step out of your usual form and howl and all that good stuff. My father had Robert Redford's The Language and Music of Wolves record album that he'd put on his stereo and pop those speakers in the window. So that was the start of Halloween for us. And I think maybe we could stand to see a little bit more horror comedy with werewolves at the focus. So that's what it means to me.
We bring you the prolific and beloved author of many, many fantastic novels and short stories, including of Foster Homes and Flies, Wallflower, and The Skull-Faced Boy, a punk rocker with a heart of gold, Mr. Chad Lutsky. So tell us, Chad, what comes to mind when you hear the term werewolf?
I think of a victim with a cursed life. I suppose that really depends on the person's moral compass. If they're a scumbag, maybe it's not so bad ripping your clothes off and running around wreaking havoc with your claws. But if you're a good guy like David from American Werewolf in London, or Talbot from the original Wolfman, then it would be a real bummer. I'm probably overthinking it, but I'm just drawn to the idea of like a lone spirit who carries this curse that they might have, like this deep secret they've got to carry around with them. And when I think about it, it's kind of funny because at a subconscious level, I'm always drawn to the human side of things, and that which lines up with everything that I write, like the dark side of humanity over supernatural, even if it's supposed to be supernatural. So, yeah, I think I now that I think about it, I find it interesting that when I think of a werewolf, I think of the human side, the part that suffers. I don't know what this says about me. Maybe I feel bad for monsters. Empathy, right?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we have Mark Matthews with us to talk about what werewolves mean to him from a poetic perspective.
Well, thank you, Krista. From a poetic perspective. So let's see, werewolves. I love werewolves, first of all. They what they represent, and I've always compared them to other kind of monsters, mythical monsters that are like vampires, and the difference between a werewolf and a vampire, meaning a vampire is very sensual and luxurious and elegant and will seduce you, but a vampire or a werewolf, on the other hand, is savage and often lustful and beast-like, and like the shadow self gone wild, running in the forest, while the vampire is in the castle, looking down. And I think there's something about us all having that beast inside of us and learning to tame that, which is what a werewolf does, because they don't control it for a while, but it's temporal. With as a vampire, it's eternal. But a werewolf is, that typically there's, the moon comes and goes, and you have this guilt. Usually there's some vampire guilt sometimes, but usually it's the werewolf guilt that's more like, what did I do? You know what I mean? It's like waking up in a drunken rage and coke fueled whatever. Like, look what I did. So it just, I think the psychology of it, I don't know if that's poetry, but the psychology of it, the transformation of it, what it represents. We all go through transformations in life, whether it be whatever life change. I'm thinking of Ginger Snaps, a very poetic werewolf and a life change. So yeah, I love reading about werewolves. I think they're an underrepresented monster, so to speak, and creature. And I tried writing about them once, as I wrote a novel about them with where I compare werewolf to the cycles of bipolar mania and the kind of the savage instincts that can come out in a manic rage, which is also temporal, and a psychiatrist who manipulates those moods. And so as I was writing that, I found that there was research that I found somebody who in the psychology department that was writing a thesis on the comparisons between werewolves and bipolar. Why I Became a Werewolf, Ohio State University, 2015, via Lauren Smith. And so I tracked her down and we talked about it to do some research.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And David L. Tamron, horror author, actor, filmmaker, with books such as hurting my toys? May I ask you, David, what do you think of when you hear the word werewolf?
Well, there's kind of two definitions. There's the sort of the supernatural definition of a creature that comes out when there's a full moon and you have to shoot it with a silver bullet. And then there's a sort of more modern terminology where there have been serial killers who have killed in such a way that the media have dubbed them to be werewolf killers because of they engage in excessive mutilation of the body and things like that. And that's actually, to me, more scary and more interesting than the supernatural silver bullet type of werewolf.
Oh, hell yeah, man. We've been doing that all month. That's very cool.
And the person I find most interesting, and if you do a Google search on werewolf killer, this guy will probably come up. His name is Mikhail Popkov. Popkov. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Russian, and he was convicted of 78 rape, murder, etc. And there's evidence suggesting that he killed actually more than that. And what he would do is he would find women. He would just destroy them so that they didn't even look like a person anymore, and just complete overkill. And then he would rape them. And so because of that, they thought he was kind of almost like an animal, and he was known as the werewolf killer. And the really scary thing was that he was a police officer, and all these people he killed, over 80 people, he did it as a police officer. He would find women walking around, and he would look for either prostitutes or women who were going to a party or something unattended by a male chaperone. And he'd offer them a ride in his that and then the car would take off, and the person would never be seen alive again. And I mean, to me, it's terrifying, that there's people
Werewolf
like
cop.
that out there. Yeah. And
We're actually covering him on he will be on our next episode.
Oh, really? I can't
Yeah.
listen to that.
Russia's most prolific serial killer.
Yeah, so they don't know the exact number, but they're saying it's in the mid 80s.
He keeps admitting to more to stay at a prison. He'll be like, I'll tell you where more bodies are. And so because the prison they want to send him to is the Black Dolphin. It's one of the most notorious prisons in the whole world. And he's like doing anything to stay out of it. And
I was wondering why he kept coming up with these confessions every couple of years.
Yeah, he's using it to his advantage. And even right now, he's awaiting trial for more.
I didn't know he was. I didn't even know there was the trial was still ongoing. That's
well, he was
crazy.
convicted of the first, I think, 53, and then he admitted to more. Went to trial again, and then when the trial's over, they're like, "Okay, here you're going to prison, to this fucked up prison, dude." And then he came back and was like, "I'll tell you where more bodies are. I got more stuff for you." And then so they don't send him to the prison, and he goes back to trial for more. This will be like his third. I don't know why they keep trying him, but I mean, I guess that's just the way they do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things disturbing about him, but the fact that he used his status as a police officer to get victims is, I mean, that's pretty heinous.
Yeah.
And the
Gerard
fact that,
Schaefer did that too.
Well, in my opinion, Gerard Schaefer is the worst serial killer ever, because I've read killer fiction and I almost threw up many times. It took me a long time to read that book. That's the most extreme book ever written, in my opinion. That guy
badly written.
True, yes. He's not a good writer, but he is. When you say the word evil, sometimes I don't know if I believe in concepts of good and evil, but he seems to be legitimately evil, and that guy terrifies me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on, David. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Beyond the Shadows podcast.
In the darkest corners of our universe lie spaces where even the light won't go.
places where terror and the unknown lurk, always waiting.
Join Ryan and Scott on the Beyond the Shadows podcast as we pull back the curtain and peer into the darkness.
We'll examine hauntings, true crimes, mysteries, UFOs, exorcisms, reincarnations, mysteries, and all things dark.
Join us as we go beyond the shadows.
Doug Brunel, a writer of depravity, author of Black Devil Spine. What comes to your mind when you hear the word werewolf?
When I think of the werewolf, I think about the imperfect balance between man's civilized side and his lustful, savage side. I say imperfect because the man who realizes he's a werewolf is usually either very scared to learn this, or he loves it and is excited by it but refuses to take responsibility. And if it was a perfect balance, he would embrace it. That's what werewolf means to me.
Aaron K. Crocker, actor, filmmaker, award-winning author of Synchronicity. What do you think of when you hear the word werewolf?
Ooh, when I hear the word werewolf, I think of dark forests, gnashing teeth, blood, cities being ripped apart. A really interesting shroud of mysticism to the entire character, just rooted in lore and history, and that's what I think of.
And we have Richard Thomas, award-winning author of 4 novels, 4 short story collections, 175 stories in print, and the editor of 4 anthologies. He's been nominated for the Bram Stoker Award twice, Shirley Jackson, Thriller, and Audie Awards. So, Mr. Richard Thomas, can you just tell us what comes to your mind when you hear the word werewolf?
Man, I was thinking about it, and I think it goes back to my childhood. I remember seeing, was it Lon Chaney?
The original Wolfman?
Yeah, I think that was the first time I saw a werewolf movie, and it really, I was a kid, scared the crap out of me.
Nice.
And just his transformation seems so, I don't know, so painful, so interesting. That's one thing that comes to mind. I think about American Werewolf in London. Think about The Howling. American Werewolf in London, I think, is one that really it was funny, but also some pretty intense moments. The Howling had some really great moments that just really stuck with me. Some visuals that just really scared the crap out of me, like the ending and stuff. I think for me,
sexy the in the porn theater.
Right. Yeah,
Man.
right. That was really twisted, and like I wasn't sure if that was the same movie. I was like, is that the one I'm thinking about? Yeah. That really bugged me. I also think about how I think the werewolf was kind of this, it opened a door to a lot of other things for me. The idea of transformation in horror. With the werewolf, obviously, traditionally, it's triggered by a full moon, right? But there are a lot of other variations on monsters and the rules, and people break them at will, and kind of play with it. You mentioned Stephen Graham Jones earlier. I just reread Mongrels recently, and they seem to be able to shift kind of at will, or with some concentration. And so I think what that really has put into my mind was, while I haven't written many werewolf stories myself personally, the idea of change, of control, and a loss of control, and the idea of something kind of hiding in your midst, that there could be somebody that sometimes the monster stuff doesn't really scare me, but the idea that the guy next door like could be something, whether it's a werewolf or a Wendigo or, a skinwalker, shapeshifter, anything in that, like, that's the stuff that really gets under my skin. The idea that it's right here, it was in the house the whole time, it's right next door. Those things really tend to kind of freak me out and scare me a bit more than some of the other stuff.
Right, the beast within.
Yeah. I also think over the years I've kind of gotten more sympathy to the werewolf's plight. Definitely Mongrels is one of those books. I also really love Benjamin Percy's The Red Moon. I love that book.
That's an epic book, man.
Yeah. But the idea that it's kind of like with vampires, the idea of living forever, sometimes that's not really what you want. It's kind of horrible. That sometimes I think being a werewolf, I found sympathy in the fact that you can't control everything and that you're going to shift and you're trying to even I've seen somebody had a story in Best Horror, maybe it was Philip Fracassi or somebody, was it Failsafe? The idea of trying to lock away somebody during their time, to keep them safe, and like the idea that you don't want to hurt others. So I think my feelings towards werewolves over the years has really changed because I've seen it shift, going from a more rudimentary, basic as a full moon, guy changes, eats people kind of thing, goes back to human form, to so many other variations over the years, and gaining more sympathy for the beast, for the creature. You go back to Frankenstein, I guess, for some of that too. Just really made me think about the nuances and complications. Because my writing, body, mind, and soul. If I can get you to care, if I can get you to feel something, I feel like I have a better chance of getting an emotional reaction from you. And so I think with the werewolf, it's not just a creature hulking out and like tearing people limb from limb. There's a consciousness, there's an entity, there's a soul within there, and whether it's in human form or not, that's trying to deal with this thing that could be probably seen as a curse, but maybe seen as a gift. I don't know. It makes it more complicated, more interesting. So I think back in the day it was a more simple story. These days I'm really excited to see what people are doing with the tropes and taking us in new directions.
Excellent. Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
And we have author, editor, and anthologist Kevin J. Kennedy, owner of KJK Publishing. Can you tell us, Kevin, what do you think of when you hear the word werewolf?
Hi there, that was my cat meowing in the background, sorry. When I think of werewolves, the first thing that always springs to mind is the movie Dog Soldiers. It's my absolute favourite werewolf movie. Obviously, I'm in Scotland. Some of the lads in the movie were Scottish, so it's there's not an awful lot of great British movies, so that's my first one. But as you probably know, I do a lot of reading, and two of my favourite werewolf books are by Ray Garton, and it's Ravenous and Bestial. Absolutely fantastic reads. As is most of Ray Garton's work, I'm a big fan of Ray Garton. And the other ones I really like are Jeff Strand. He's wrote a few books, Wolf Hunt and the sequels. And for anybody that's not read Jeff Strand before, he's got quite a comedic spin on everything. But there's quite a lot of action in the books. They're quite fast-paced as well. And they're probably my other joint favourite books. I've dabbled a little bit myself in writing, so in my most recent collection, my A to Z of Horror, I wrote the E for Eleanor is a werewolf story, and it's set in Scotland and up in the Highlands, and it's pretty fast paced and pretty brutal as well, and that was quite a lot of fun to write. So that was my first time dabbling with writing any werewolf fiction. And again, most of my favourite authors are a lot of my favourite authors at one point or another have done a werewolf story at least, if not a book. But I think you've maybe seen online I'm releasing a vampires one, and I'm thinking about after that maybe doing a werewolf one to sort of tie in, making a sort of series of different monsters. That's probably my thoughts on werewolves.
And we have beloved horror writer Duncan Ralston, author of such books as Womb and Midwives, among many, many other lovely books. Sir, can you tell us what comes to your mind when you hear the word werewolves?
First of all, beloved, I appreciate that. I don't know how beloved I am, but
well, you've got a pretty big fan base there, buddy.
And some enemies, but whatever.
Fuck them.
Werewolves. I have complicated thoughts on werewolves because I really love werewolves. I grew up in the 70s and 80s and, enjoying movies like Teen Wolf and whatnot. So it's a complicated relationship with them because I do love werewolves, but I don't find a lot of werewolf fiction or movies that I connect with. I don't know why. I'm not sure. I like the idea of the id or whatever coming out and taking over. But the aside from like Ginger Snaps, or I can't think of any modern ones that I actually like.
I like what you said about the
Mm.
id, like on a poetic level, like you feel like it's the inner subconscious, like the id, Freudian's id.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I think it was in Stephen King's Danse Macabre where he's equated it with the like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think similar sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, aside from the dog part. Also, now there's so many things like Twilight or paranormal romance that has this sort of dog fetish, which is kind of strange. I don't really understand that. Like, I get the alpha thing, but everything else kind of a strange fetish to me. Kind of taking over the genre.
Yeah, werewolf erotica it's huge. I've thought about writing it myself just to make a couple bucks.
I don't blame you.
Hello, I'm Mark.
I'm Gina.
And together we are Mental Illness Theater. Or at least we try.
We try to survive it.
We're the hosts of The Worst, a podcast where I deep dive horrible subjects and tell the story to Gina.
And I tell terrible, tasteless jokes to kind of break up the awful, soul-crushing details that you bring us.
I try and you try, and that's what makes it great.
Yeah, I mean, stop being upset. We are trying our best.
And honestly, we're weird people. We find this makes it a little more palatable to get through the horrible details of some of the worst true crime.
Yeah, because otherwise, I just want to take an ice pick to my own eardrums.
I can't do it anymore.
No.
So if you're the type of person who finds, Weekend at Bernie's the most hilarious movie ever, we might be up your alley.
Give us a try.
Absolutely. Just look for Mental Illness Theater on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or whatever platform you happen to use for podcasts.
And now we welcome Richard Chizmar, New York Times bestselling author of Chasing the Boogeyman and Gwendy's Button Box, founder of Cemetery Dance Magazine and the Cemetery Dance Book Imprint, winner of 2 World Fantasy Awards, 4 International Horror Guild Awards, and the Horror Writers Association Board of Trustees Award. Can you tell us what you think of when you hear the word werewolf?
It's, that's interesting. I was just telling somebody about an old werewolf novel called The Hyde Effect. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Yeah, it's it was published by Leisure, so it was, a shitload of copies were out there. But not the most prestigious publisher, but it's such a great kind of pulp, werewolf story that I've never forgotten. And I brought it up to somebody the other day. God, that's one of my favorites, because we all know the ones that are most popular, the Howling and the rest of them. But this one, for me, is my favorite. What do werewolves mean, man? I don't know. Naturally I'm a campfire guy, so I think of the full moon and all that stuff. But unbridled kind of, I'm coming from. I guess I would come from the angle of that awakening, passion and I don't know. I do know Cycle of the Werewolf was the first R-rated movie my kids saw when they were I had to convince my wife.
Oh, I remember buying that book for the first time as a kid and being so into it.
Oh, me too. And I actually had the pleasure of having dinner with Bernie Wrightson out in Los Angeles years ago, before he passed. And I got to tell him all those stories about, reading it with my kid, once he was a little older. And like I said, I remember it was New Year's Eve and we broke the rule. It's like, you're going to watch an R-rated movie tonight, buddy.
It was my son's first Stephen King book, as well. So.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
That's great.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only award-winning New York Times best-selling author of more books than I can count, including Mongrels, My Heart is a Chainsaw, and All the Beautiful Sinners, professor of English, and renowned werewolf aficionado and expert, Stephen Graham Jones. May I ask you, please, sir, what do you immediately think of when you hear the word werewolf?
Usually I'm reading a book or a story or watching a film or a show. So what I think is I'm about to see some werewolves, you know? It's like I'm driving down a road and I see there's a sign in green with a white frame that says werewolf. And so I know that down the road there's going to be some werewolves, you know?
Any poetic implications?
Poetic implications? No, just excitement, you know? I know the werewolf's going to be jumping on somebody and the werewolf's going to be in a bad situation, you know?
Oh, I know it's got to be deeper than that from you. I've read your books. Come on, man. Is it the inner beast, the transformation, anything like that?
Oh, I get excited to see the transformation or to read about the transformation. Yeah, because it seems like every creator, everyone who writes about a werewolf tends to come up with their own way of doing it. You know, I mean, sometimes you'll have, like in Twilight, you see Jacob and his people, they jump in the air when they come down, they're werewolves, but then you see like I don't know, American Werewolf in London or Howling, and it takes 2 or 3 minutes, you know, of air bladders and latex and all that kind of fun. And what was that television series, Hemlock Grove, where the eyeballs pop out, and is that the one where the werewolf eats the like extra material or something? I like that kind of stuff, man.
That was a great show. So you're still just like a hardcore horror movie fan at heart when it comes down to it, all your degrees.
Oh
and
yeah.
everything.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure.
Oh, do you prefer a bipedal werewolf on 2 legs or a werewolf on all 4s?
You know, I think a werewolf on all 4s makes a lot more sense. I can see an animal evolving like that. And like a werewolf on 2 legs, they're not really hunters, they're monsters, you know? And they just lumber around and they're a good target and they're really obvious with their bad selves. So yeah, 2-footed werewolves, they kind of look cool, like in Dog Soldiers. They definitely look cool, but I just don't see how they'd last in nature, you know?
They wouldn't be as fast, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also there's also an issue of tails, you know, like I think werewolves look cooler without a tail, like a little, you know, a duck-tailed Australian Shepherd or something. But I think I think they really need a big heavy tail if they're going to be running down white-tailed deer out in the trees, and they got to be able to corner, you know.
So do you think that werewolves eat deer in the woods? Is that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think humans are at all their first choice. I think like all those bad situations werewolves find themselves in usually involve them finally having to go after a human. But no, it makes like Jack Russell from Werewolf at Night. That dude, he loved to go out and hunt elk and deer. He didn't want to be in the city doing stuff. He just wanted to go out and hunt in the trees. And I think that's what werewolves want.
Right. So they're just more creatures of nature than actual monsters that are bloodthirsty for humans.
Correct. They get monstrous when they get into like a density of people. That's when that's when they become monstrous because everyone like monstrifies them. You know, they're like, look at that weird thing. We got to shoot it, and so they have to fight back. Like the end of American Werewolf in London, the werewolf in the subway. What's a werewolf going to do in a subway but kill people? You know.
How about the moon? Anything with the moon? Do you see?
No, the moon makes zero sense to me. The moon is just reflected sunlight. So if the moon forces a werewolf to change, then what would the sun do? You know, the moon doesn't make any sense to me. I understand this. I understand the cyclical nature of letting your inner beast out once a month, and maybe your own schedule does perhaps line up with a full moon. But the association of full moons with werewolves starts back in is it Petrarchus? Back in like Greek and Roman times, when we first started getting werewolf stories written down. And people would say you can, like, on a full moon night, the wolves are out. They would say, you know, that kind of stuff. But it's not that the wolves are just out on a full moon. It's that it's a full moon so you can see more wolves. And so the association just kind of got hammered into our psyches, and we run with it, you know. But no, the moon makes no sense as a trigger to me.
I just read something interesting. The screenwriter for The Wolfman was Jewish and had escaped Nazi Germany. And he said that the
Kurt
moon...
Siodmak, yeah.
Yeah. He said the moon was a symbol of the swastika, that it could turn a normal person into a raving, murderous beast.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I never had read that about him. That's really cool.
Well, Stephen Graham Jones, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us your thoughts on werewolves. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for letting me be part. I've always got things to say about them.
All right, and my co-host Matthew Brockmeyer, award-winning author of Kind Nepanthe and Under Rotting Sky. What does werewolf mean to you?
Well, for me, it all goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the goddess of sex and violence turned her lover into a wolf. It's like these two primordial forces of nature, sex and violence, coming up and just tearing through someone, turning them into a monster and a beast. I think of both The Howling and American Werewolf in London had transformation scenes inside a porno theater, which I think is really poignant, especially The Howling, because it was just such a violent and terrible scene. But I also think of the medieval idea of a werewolf, someone who actively tries to become a monster by, adorning a wolf skin or drinking water out of a wolf print. They're trying to become a beast. And, we've talked about all these serial killers all month. And I think that really relates there, because oftentimes a werewolf is seen as a victim. It's a curse, and it's this beast within them coming out. But I think we need to remember that some people actually try to find that inner beast and become it. And in both aspects is absolutely terrifying. And I think that's why the werewolf mythos is just so powerful and legendary, a part of human culture, a part of human nature, and will always be with us.
Thank you so very much. That was amazing. I think that summed up everything that we talked about on all of these different episodes. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And we have my lovely co-host, Krista Carmen, Stoker-nominated author of Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked, whose novel, The Daughters of Block Island, is going to be released on December 1st and is already being lavished with so much praise. Can you tell us, Krista, what comes to your mind when you hear the word werewolf?
I think when I think of werewolf, the very first thing that comes to mind is kind of like just the quintessential werewolf mask, and like I do kind of lump it in with the witch, the major archetypes of Halloween and spooky season, and I do kind of think of it along with the archetype of the vampire and the witch and the ghost, and I'm sure that's heightened too by the fact that I have a 3-year-old daughter and I read her children's books, and it's sort of this a bit cookie cutter image of these figures and of the werewolf. But when I really think more about it and I try to think of what it means to me from like a horror perspective of the type of horror I like to write and read, I really love when the werewolf is used as a symbol for something unexpected. I think we talked a little about on our werewolves throughout cinematic history. We talked a little bit about that Black Mirror episode where the werewolf mythos was sort of being used to glimpse somebody that was famous, and the paparazzi and the sort of like vicious voyeurism that we can turn on people. And I don't think I've really seen that done before. And I also like to think about like I've written a lot of addiction horror. So obviously the werewolf is like a great stand-in for somebody that's suffering from some sort of substance abuse. You become something you're not at a certain time, whether it's through craving or relapse or just another day has dawned and you're in the throes of active addiction. Like the werewolf is just such a rife symbol for a lot of mental health issues. And I think it just kind of opens it up to creators, filmmakers, writers, just having such a depth and breadth of directions they can go with it from that perspective. So I guess I like to think of it as both the fun Halloween mask and like the fun, spooky thing and creepy creature, but it goes much, much deeper than that as well.
It is absolutely fascinating how you can use that mythos for so much. And I think addiction is a very good metaphor for the beast coming out, especially
Yes,
alcohol.
absolutely.
Alcohol turns people into fucking total monsters.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think that's going to do it for today's episode. And we want to thank all the amazing writers who agreed to talk with us. If you're not familiar with them, you should really check out their stuff. We're going to put links to their websites in the show notes, so check them out. And as always, you know we want to hear from you. Got a case you think we should cover? You just want to say hi? Drop us a line at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.